Scripture for the message is Mark 5, verses 21 to 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And so Jesus went with him. When a great crowd followed him, they thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered much under many physicians, had spent all that she had, and yet was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." Immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned in the crowd, and he said, "Who touched my garments?" The disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing upon you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling. She fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease." Now while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." They mocked him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and he went to where the child was. Now taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. He strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Many changes occur in our life. Some of them are unexpected and they can leave us reeling. And others, we know those changes are coming, but it's still hard to know the full impact of them until the change has fully occurred. We say things like, "I didn't know it was going to be like this." Adjustments have to be made, sometimes reluctantly. Is this what I really want? For this change to happen in this way? The good news is that every change can be dealt with. We can move forward in life. And the spiritual formula for success seems to be those words of Jesus in our text: "Fear not, only believe." Fear wants us to long for a lost past, whether that past is real or whether it's just perceived, because fear also has this way of helping us to forget the hard things of the past and only focus on the good things, and so it becomes an idealized past. Belief, on the other hand, trusts in Jesus, the Jesus who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so there's a constancy that Jesus provides in the midst of any and every change. No matter how often, whether unexpected or expected, he guides us through all those changes. That's what our text, I think, lifts up for us today. We have two episodes with two different women, a dying 12-year-old girl and a woman who's had a disease for 12 years. Jesus is returning from the other side of the Sea of Galilee, a crowd confronts him. A man named Jairus approaches him with a plea. Now, literally, the plea starts out to say, "My daughter is having her last moments." This translation, "My daughter is at the point of death." She's barely hanging on, and she's having her last moments. This, of course, would have been a huge, unexpected change for a family. And yet, at least, notice the father is turning to God, for he continues with his plea to Jesus. "So when you come, lay hands on her, that she may be saved and live." And so Jesus goes with them. As they were going, a large crowd now presses upon them. And here we're introduced to a woman who's had many changes in her life, and all of them seem to be bad ones. She's had a flow of blood for 12 years, we're called. Now, it would be bad enough in our modern world to just be having bleeding for 12 years, but back in the Jewish community that she was a part of, the bleeding meant you were ritually unclean. And so you couldn't participate in worship, and you were not supposed to even touch anyone. So for 12 years, she's had no physical touch with anyone. So she's suffered greatly. Now, she tried to adjust to these changes. It says she went to many doctors, yet suffered much, and spent all that was hers, and yet was nothing better, but rather worse. And it's now in a hope against hope, having heard about Jesus and the works that he does, she approaches in order to touch his garment, trusting that he's going to make some kind of a difference in her life that nothing else could. And what was the result? The text says, immediately her flow of blood dried up, and she knew by her body that she was healed from her scourge, her disease. Jesus recognizes the power that came out of him, and so asks, who touched him? The woman finally comes trembling. She falls down and worships him, and she tells her story. Jesus says, daughter, your faith has saved you. Be well from your scourge. Belief, that trusting in Jesus, belief did what fear could not do. Now people from Jairus' house approach and say, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? So once again, another change has occurred that only seems to be bad, and yet here is where Jesus tells him, fear not, only believe. So he enters the house with the parents and 3 of his disciples. Presumably the rest of the disciples had to hold back the rest of the crowd from following them at the time. There were mourners at the house. He sends them all out, saying she's not dead but sleeping. And now he grasps the child's hand, and he says to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. The result? Immediately the little girl arose and was walking. Once again, belief did what fear could not. In both episodes, changes were occurring, but they didn't have to be for the worse. They would be if the woman and Jairus and his wife had been fearful, but instead they trusted in Jesus. They looked to him. Belief did something that fear couldn't. He led them through those changes. Let's hear how Amanda Pennock experienced some of these changes. Her and her husband were going on a trip. They were going to visit their newborn granddaughter. The car was all packed, and Amanda's going over in her mind of what to leave behind, and oh yes, she forgot her cooler of alcohol. I couldn't imagine taking such a long trip without it. Now, how did she get to this point? She shared that it was only a few years earlier that she had been a preschool teacher, and she was a leader in her church. She worked with the youth, she taught Bible study, she went on mission trips, And at home, she had good friends, and a strong marriage, and a nice house. And yet she said, after 10 years at the church, and by the way, this wasn't intentional, I didn't remember this part when I chose the example, but after 10 years at the church that she was at, we decided to leave after some disagreements with the way the church was headed. Changes were occurring at the church, and she gave in to fear and trying to cling to a past that wasn't going to be there anymore, and so she couldn't cope with the present, so she turned to alcohol to escape from that present that she was actually in. Now, to be fair to Amanda, she learned this type of response from her childhood. She said she had an abusive and alcoholic father. Growing up, I lived in constant fear for my life. She told stories about her dad had a gun and he would get drunk, and then in the middle of the night you'd hear a gun firing off, to scare her, and then wake up in the morning there was a hole in the bedroom wall. So she was actually fearing whether, accidentally she was going to, be dead sometime because of him being so drunk and not knowing what he was going to be doing. Now, as she grew up, Amanda eventually, as a young adult, would occasionally get involved in church life, and she said that was the only time she could not rely on alcohol. And yet here, now she had left this church after being there 10 years, and she had been drinking now for 8 years. But God came to her aid. He gave her a rare and unusual experience. They arrived at their daughter's house. And she said, as I held my newborn granddaughter in my arms for the first time, and I looked into her eyes, I felt God looking back at me through the granddaughter's eyes. I can't describe the feeling. God was reminding me how much He loves me, how He gives me a hope and a future. I felt complete love in His presence. To me, Jesus was breaking her free from what she thought was an ideal past. And He was showing her life now in the present and possibilities for the future. To make a long story short, she joined Alcoholics Anonymous. She started reading her Bible again. She started praying. Certainly she had trials later in life, she said, but now, at least this time, she would start to trust in Jesus instead of being captive to her fears. She was fearing not, just believing. So many changes occur in our life. We can be reeling from them. Is this what I want? The good news is we have someone who helps us through every change, no matter how big, how small, whether unexpected or expected. Fear will rear its head. It'll try to get us to cling to a lost past. And yet if we go with that fear, we'll be trapped in that past. Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, can bring us through any and every change. Look to Him. Trust Him in your heart. He will guide you through. Jesus is still saying to each of us today, fear not.